Grant Robertson.
Mr Chair, you were spoiled for choice. Thank you, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, I actually do want to pick up the very point that Fletcher Tabato was discussing, and that is the question of co-location, and perhaps go back to the beginning, because I think there's some confusion here around the question of a deliberate breach of secrecy by a staff member and an inadvertent breach. And currently, the Act only applies where someone knowingly acts in contravention of Section 81 of the Tax Administration Act, which is about disclosing information that they should not do. And should a breach occur, there's a legal process to determine, as Mr Tabato said, whether the breach was unintended or made knowingly, and then appropriate sanctions apply. When we were discussing this in the committee, the position we reached was that an employee could be judged to have knowingly contravened Section 81 where the breach was inadvertent, but it occurred where there was a real risk inherent in the co-located environment. And as it says in our report, for example, an IRD employee might be aware of the risk that a co-located employee could overhear information, but not able to avoid that possibility. So we acknowledge that, but obviously we have an obligation to ensure that that information is held in appropriate secrecy. And so that was the discussion we was having was, well, do we need a threat of a sanction to emphasise the point that this is a really important area of confidentiality and there is an increased risk with co-located departments? And you know, at one point we almost discussed whether we needed the clause at all, because actually at the moment the obligations on IRD staff are quite clear, and they know what they are, and they sign an enhanced secrecy agreement above and beyond what almost any other public servant would do. But the co-location issue means that there is now a set of increased risks around those employees. And so, you know, we did on balance decide to include the concept of taking reasonable care in that co-located environment. And quite clearly, for IRD employees who've already signed their secrecy agreements, they're going to be taking care, but this is a clause that at least acknowledges in some form or other that reasonable care would be required. Again, to quote the most excellent report of the committee, being compelled to take reasonable care would motivate employees to proactively manage the risk associated with a co-located environment, and it would provide an additional safeguard against reckless and negligent behaviour. I don't want people to gain the impression that we think the IRD staff are going around and engaging in reckless and negligent behaviour, but that the risk of inadvertently giving information out needs to be considered. I do think it would be useful for the Minister, who I believe may take a call, to just address the way in which IRD are going to go about taking this into account. And this applies to the wider public service, in my view, as well. That while we're all looking for the efficiencies that come from public sector agencies being co-located, we know in the regions of New Zealand, you know, there used to be large public service agencies, and I don't know a city like Wanganui until the government tore them out and took them back to Palmerston North. But in places like Wanganui, where public service agencies come together as a matter of efficiency and ease for the public to use them, there is a lot of information flowing around. And we've been encouraging, and through legislation, including in this legislation in fact, we've been encouraging public sector departments to share information where relevant. So we've got on one hand a level of encouragement, but on the other the risk that the information, particularly around tax, could inadvertently be shared. So I know for those who are listening in on this, they might be saying, well, why was this such a controversial issue? Because it is about sensitive taxpayer information. And we know that every time there's a privacy breach, every time someone leaves a briefcase on Lambton Quay, that this causes upset. Well, here we are with people day in, day out, needing to talk about taxpayer information, but are working now in an environment where people who don't have the same secrecy provisions in their contracts will be there. So we're really just looking for an assurance from the Minister here that it's understood what's happened here. The committee grappled with it. We came up with what we thought was a decent solution, which was to include a higher duty of care, but not try to, effectively criminalise people just going about their daily jobs. So I hope the Minister understands what the committee's tried to do here. We certainly support the co-location of departments, but when it's IRD, we do absolutely want to make sure that New Zealand and taxpayers' privacy is protected. Given that you haven't rung the bell, Mr Chair, although you are just about to do that, I'll come back to another matter later.
I call the Honourable